mentioned to you that we were going to talk a little bit about the importance of textual criticism. This is not higher textual criticism where scholars, many of them not even Christians, tear the Word of God apart and don't believe that it's really inspired. We're talking about looking at the manuscripts that we have and trying to determine what the original autograph said when it was written down. Because we have so many manuscripts, we have to do this. So, in His providence, and then again, don't forget, this is God preserving His Word for us. These 5,000 manuscripts written by different scribes and copied. Dr. Grasmick at Dallas Seminary, when I was in one of his Greek classes, said this, and I think Rick mentioned this: we have 105% of the New Testament, meaning the original autograph information and words are in these manuscripts. We have more than the original, and so we have to do a little thinking to get back to the original, but it's there. Every word has been preserved. We haven't lost anything. So the many variations present in the copies don't obscure the original. It's there, but we have to think to get back to it. And that's what textual criticism is all about. Some important points now about this, because this, you don't want to get the wrong idea here. It's important to note that variants, like the difference in a Greek preposition or a pronoun in one text or another, and errors are not the same thing. Variants are differences in wording among the various manuscripts, but that doesn't mean we have an error in terms of the truth or the communication of truth because of the variants. That's important to understand. Verbal agreement between various New Testament manuscripts is closer than the verbal agreement between many of our English translations that we have in terms of what is there. And these variants affect about 10% of the New Testament text. Of the entire text, it only affects 10%. And none of the variants, none of them call into question any major point of doctrine for us. In other words, we're getting back to the original, but there's no major issues as we do this procedure. It doesn't call into question any kind of doctrine. A couple of points. The greatest number of variants involve differences maybe in spelling a word. You know how if you're copying something, you may misspell a word, or dyslexic or something, two letters get changed around and you don't even see it as you're doing it. That type of thing, maybe spelling, which makes no difference in the meaning of the text and can be attributed to scribal error. And most of the things we're going to look at have to do with the way the scribes did things for us. The second largest group, that's the first largest group, spelling. Second largest group of variants involves omissions of small Greek words or variations maybe in word order of how it was copied, putting a word before another word or after it. Again, people, these types of differences they can be easily explained as you look at how tedious it was to copy line after line after line. And remember how Rick talked about the uncial text where everything was just a string of capital Greek letters. And that's easy to make a mistake as you're trying to follow that and copy that exactly. It's not like you have a sentence with punctuation and it's easy to leave out a letter or to pick up a word that was in a sentence before and kind of focus on it and write it again. Those kinds of things are what we're talking about in the copying of the text. You can see how difficult that would be. Again, differences, easy to explain, and make no difference in the meaning of the text. So let's talk about how the scribes may have erred a little bit. The variations mentioned above can be attributed to basically unintentional scribal errors first. They just didn't mean to do it and they made a mistake, just like you might in copying somebody else's work or a paragraph out of a book or something like that. And little consequence. The books Rick shared up at front, one of them was by Lightfoot, and he has some great a review of these kinds of errors on pages 88 and 89, so I refer you there. A second reason for differences may have been intentional scribal errors. And this is interesting, and let's think about it. A scribe would intentionally change a text, often to correct what he perceived to be an error. Okay? For example, scribes would correct spelling or fix grammatical forms. You know, oh, that's not proper grammar. So they'll fix it, grammatical forms, that type of thing. And in an effort to improve the text that's being copied. So now they've changed from one text to another text as they've copied it, and then that text gets copied again. And this is important to know, especially in the Gospels, the scribes were inclined to change a word in an effort to bring agreement between the texts of the Gospels. So they know the Word of God. They know what the Gospels say, and there's a great example of this in Matthew 11:19. Later manuscripts have a word change from earlier manuscripts. The earlier manuscripts in Matthew 11:19 read this way: "Yet wisdom is vindicated by her deeds." Okay, later manuscripts have this in place: "Yet wisdom is vindicated by her children." There's a big difference between deeds and children. It's hard to make a mistake in spelling with a word like that. But that change brings Matthew 11:19 into parallel with Luke 7:35, which reads, "Yet wisdom is vindicated by all her children." So now you have a scribe saying, man, I'm going to bring Matthew in to conformity with Luke and change deeds to children. Does that make sense? Trying to help us. But that's an intentional change. And so you would read Matthew 11:19, and we're going to use this as an example as we go through our rules to say which text of Matthew is the original. Does it conform to Luke's text, or is it by her deeds? And we're going to try to help you know how to make a decision. The way textual critics then look at the change from deeds to children in the later manuscripts is this intentional scribal change to bring things into conformity. Matthew in parallel with Luke, meaning deeds, and we'll see that deeds then was probably the original, and we have rules about why we would say that. And let's look at those now. The decision with respect to which reading is more accurate, and you can see how this is important. In fact, at seminary, every time we had a Greek class or did an exegesis on a passage, there was usually some little textual issue that we had to look at and explain and make a decision on which preposition was the original, and you had to list the reasons and apply the rules. And it was a lot of fun, really. Engineers would love it. We have some engineers in our class because you can get into it and come to a good conclusion with a basis for it. And so we have rules called canons of criticism. Lightfoot lists 3 and summarizes them as follows. And so here we go. And the last 2 are kind of similar, but let's just read them as we have them. The quality of witnesses is more important than the quantity of witnesses. Okay? In other words, the reading of a few earlier manuscripts, those determined to be closer to the original autographs, would be preferred to a clear scribal change that then gets incorporated into a vast number of manuscripts after that point. So there might be more manuscripts that reflect Matthew 11:19 that reflects Luke because the scribe made the change, and then you're in an area where there's more copying going on, and so there's more manuscripts, quantity than quality. The earlier ones may say deeds, the vast majority of the later ones might say put the 2 together. So we don't want to just say, hey, it's the quantity that matters. No, it's quality. And often quality has to do with the earliest manuscripts that we have. So the reading of earlier manuscripts, he says, would be preferred to a clear scribal change incorporated into a vast majority of later manuscripts. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. So with Matthew 11:19 as an example, a few older manuscripts reflecting the reading of deeds would carry more weight than hundreds of later manuscripts reflecting the reading children. Okay, that's one of the rules. Quality versus quantity. Now, this is interesting. The more difficult reading is to be preferred. What do we mean? Because the scribes were inclined to simplify the text they were copying, the more difficult reading is the reading of the text that would be harder to attribute to a scribe changing it. For example, with Matthew 11:19 and Luke 7:35, it's harder to explain why a scribe would change the word from children to deeds. Why would he do that? As opposed from deeds to children. We can understand why it would be changed to children, so that means that deeds would be the more difficult reading or the more difficult change for a scribe to make. Why would he do that? Hence, the deeds is more difficult and is preferred to be the original reading because scribes went with what was flowed better. They wouldn't change it to where it would have something that didn't flow with another text or parallel another text. And then finally, the different reading in parallel passages is usually the more reliable one. The reason for this is because it's easier to explain a scribe bringing parallel passages into conformity. This kind of parallels the one before with one another rather than changing the wording to a different reading. Those kind of go together. So the deeds is harder and different, and that would be probably the original. So these three rules are not exhaustive, but they help us. And now I want to give you a chance. In your package you have an exercise, and I've written it here on the board for us. Textual criticism exercise for lesson 6. And so what we're going to try to do is find the original reading of the text. And this is, we've come up with, I know what the original reading is because I made it. So you can help me find it, if you will. So let's think about the rules we have. We have dates for our verse. Copy 1, 2. I've only given you 6 copies for this verse, and we want to try to find out what was penned in the Gospel of Greg originally. Okay. Copy 1. It's from 200 AD. Okay? And it reads, so that's good. It's an earlier manuscript. Okay? You are saved through grace by faith alone. Now that's theologically accurate, isn't it? You are saved by grace, through grace by faith alone. Now, equally, in terms of the weight of an earlier manuscript, we have a copy 2 that has the same date. And it reads, you are saved by grace through faith alone. Okay? So we have 2 different ideas. Through grace by faith, by grace through faith alone. And notice, as we try to determine issues with regard to the texts, what's one issue we have in this copy that is not in this copy? And maybe you're going, yeah, what do you think? Okay, that's good. Notice here, this text is missing a letter. It's a misspelled word. Through. We're missing the GH. Okay? So that's an issue. That's a spelling error. Okay? Probably not in the original. But anyway, we have these two ideas that are same date. Let's move forward in history then. Copy 3. You are saved by grace alone, through faith alone. What's going on in this text? What's different from our earlier manuscripts? Okay, good. We have a repeat of a word. Okay? We have a repeat of the word alone. Earlier we had through faith alone, by faith alone, whatever. Now we have by grace alone, through faith alone. So there's the additional, an additional word in there, okay? Probably added by a scribe. Maybe he even was copying along and saw this and repeated it and didn't mean to. I don't know. But this is in 350 AD this shows up. So it's not in the earliest manuscripts. Copy 4. You are saved by grace through faith alone. Okay. This one now parallels what text that has gone before that was earlier in terms of word order, that type of thing. And we would say, and you can see, that it parallels this text exactly, except for the misspelled word. Okay? Saved by grace through faith alone. Then we get some later manuscripts, and hopefully you'll be able to see what's going on here. We are saved by grace alone through faith. Okay? That's different from what we have before. Where the difference is where they placed the alone, the word alone. Up here it's in a different place. Say again? We versus you. Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you. This pronoun is certainly different, right? This is a plural pronoun. Very good. This is a singular pronoun. So maybe that was a scribal change to communicate truth about the community. And then how about this one? Picks up on this again, but adds to the theological idea. We are saved by grace alone through faith with baptism. And we would say, well, I don't think, that's 1000 AD. So as you make a decision, what kind of things would we try to put together that would help us? Well, our rules would say, hey, we want the weight rests with the earlier manuscripts. That's important. Earlier manuscripts carry a lot of weight. Okay? We can understand a scribal mistake here with the addition of alone in 350. And there's reasons for that. Maybe, just getting tired and adding a word. 400, this text agrees with our earlier manuscript in 200. However, it has the proper spelling of through. So that's very important because we have an early, same word order, same idea, but no spelling mistakes. So these two are very much connected, if that makes sense, as we go through history. And then the last two we can eliminate because that's a major change in pronoun and also how it's stated. So, which one do you think of these 6 is the original autograph penned by Greg? All right, you got it right. It's this one here. And we have the weight of the date, and we have the weight with proper spelling. So this is the answer, and that's in your notes later. So if you were leaning this way, you did good.